sees America as imperfect enough to pal around with terrorists who targeted their own country?
I was Sarah Palin on October 4th of this year, and the pallin around reference was to Williams Ayers. He became a flashpoint in the election because of his association with Barack Obama and his association with the Weather Underground, a radical anti-war group active in the early 1970s. Williams Ayers is an education professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and his 2001 book, Fugitive Days, Memoirs of an Anti-War Activist, has been re-released with a new afterword. Mr. Ayers, thank you for joining us. I know you don't do much of this, and I appreciate you coming on. Your book's out in paperback. Let me ask you, what was your personal reaction when you saw Governor Palin exploiting your relationship with Barack Obama?
I think I saw it after everybody else saw it, because I don't tend to watch television news, and I have 3 grown sons who kind of filter those things, and they sent it to me, and I thought it was outrageous, really. It was outrageous and profoundly dishonest, and I chose not to react to it at the time. I couldn't see any honest way to react to it.
What's the phrase palling around mean in reality? You weren't pals with Barack Obama, obviously. Well, explain. Well, what was your relationship with him?
Again, I don't know what they were thinking exactly. We certainly, I was on a board with President-elect Obama. We did live in the same neighborhood. But the dishonesty of the narrative really is about the fact that if you can place 2 people in the same room or prove that they took a bus downtown together, that they're somehow responsible for one another's politics, policies, outlook, and behavior. And that seems to me patently absurd. It's guilt by association, and I think, thankfully, the American people rejected it this time.
Well, let's talk about what they were up to. They were trying to tie Barack Obama to you and to the terrorism threat we're under right now by the fact that the Weather Underground was involved with bombings of the Capitol building and the Pentagon, which obviously has resonance today because both those structures were hit on 9/11. What's your reaction to that? To the particular reference to the fact that you were involved with that?
No, I don't think. I think what they were trying to do was to get anything they could that would raise the question, who is this man? And so an association with me or an association with Jeremiah Wright, all these things were attempts to say, this guy can't be trusted. And again, I think people rejected that.
Let me ask you about this quote. I read it in the New York Times the other day, and honestly, it bothered me, but, you know, I certainly shared your anti-war views. I demonstrated and did all that stuff. But let me ask you this. The Weather Underground went on to take responsibility for placing several small bombs in empty offices. The ones at the Pentagon and at the U.S. Capitol were the most notorious, as an illegal and unpopular war consumed the nation. Do you stand by that decision by the Weather Underground to plant those bombs? Do you think that was a good thing to do at the time?
You know, I don't defend those actions, and I don't defend them in my book, Fugitive Days. What I try to do in Fugitive Days is to understand how this young man, set down in that context, could find himself in these extreme positions. I think we made enormous mistakes, and I think that there were terrible things done. I think we ought to have in this country a truth and reconciliation process where we really tell the truth about who did what when during the Vietnam years and try to sort it out. I feel I'd like to take responsibility for the things I did. I also think people who murdered millions of people should take responsibility as well.
You refer to those acts of those bombs planted in the Capitol and the Pentagon as extreme vandalism directed at monuments to war and racism. Well, what about the possibility that they might have killed somebody?
That would have been horrific.
Those bombs.
That would have been despicable. And we were
because, you know, back, I have a little history on this. I was taken by your comment about it being, you know, empty offices. You know, the bomb that went off in the U.S. Capitol in early, well, actually late winter of 1971 went off in a bathroom in the Capitol building. The old part of the Capitol goes all the way back to the beginnings of our republic. And there were police officers in that area. In fact, one I knew at the time had just been in that bathroom, and only a second or actually about a minute later had checked in the door there. So we knew he had been in that bathroom within a minute or so of the bomb going off. What do you make of that? It isn't just vandalism. There's people involved when you try to blow up a Capitol building.
Well, it's horrific, absolutely terrible if someone were to be hurt. But let's again remember the context. We had created conditions where the majority of people were opposed to the war in Vietnam. Every month that the war went on, 2,000 Vietnamese were killed, murdered, innocent people. And what could we do to stop that that terrible destruction. And I'm not claiming that what we did was terrific. But then again, those who demonstrated, which I did, we weren't that effective either. Those who went into the Democratic Party and tried to create a peace wing, they weren't that effective either. So the dilemma remains. Who did the right thing? I'm not so sure. And I don't want to defend what we did, but nor do I think it was completely insane.
Well, let me get to you on that, because it seems to me, I mean, I was there. I was a Capitol policeman at the time, so I was one of the guys that could have been killed, obviously. At the time your guys put that bomb in there, so I have a little personal interest. It wasn't just vandalism. To me, it was life-threatening to the guys I worked with, and that there were some pretty good guys working there. In fact, like a lot of Americans, I look at the United States Capitol not as a symbol of war and racism, but as although there was some history there, certainly with building the Capitol building and how it was built. I understand all that. I understand the motives. Don't you think the anti-war demonstrations where millions of people came for the moratorium and the March on the Pentagon and things like that were more effective demonstrations of opposition than bombing, which was,
perhaps,
as you say, potentially horrendous?
Well, perhaps, and I was involved in those as well. And you're right. I want to think of the Capitol as a symbol of freedom and a symbol of democracy. The problem is these symbols cut a lot of different ways. To you and me, that's what we would like to believe. But actually, to people who are kind of the targets of American power, they represent something quite different.
What do you think is the lesson of Vietnam right now? Here we are. I'm going to give you a shot. What's the lesson?
I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
What's the lesson of Vietnam for America?
Well, I think one of the lessons is that we should be very, very wary when the United States government tells us that we must invade and occupy a country. We should be very wary of being led down that path, and we should be rethinking right now. Most of all, we should rethink America's role in the world. Do we have to be the policeman of the world? Do we have to be the one and only superpower? Or could we imagine ourselves a nation among nations? Could we imagine a foreign policy based on justice rather than power?
Yeah. Aren't you scared a little bit? I certainly am, by the willingness of the American people to assume language, brand new language like weapons of mass destruction, homeland security, all these references to a new kind of foreign policy, forward-leaning, preemptive, preventive war. Preventive war sounds like an oxymoron to me, but aren't you scared that the American people bought every one of those words, bought the whole argument we had to go to Iraq?
I actually think that those are contested, and I think you're right to worry about how much we did buy into that. But on the other hand, I think we should be very hopeful that people rejected, quite a month ago, rejected 8 years of the politics of fear, the politics of terror, the politics of violence and war, and said, let's turn in a different direction. So we've ended the era, I think, of 9/11, or at least turned a page on it. And we've entered an era of yes, we can. But the question remains, yes, we can what? And in foreign policy, can we become a nation among nations? Can we become a nation who believes in justice?
Well, those are good things.
Everyone?
I think you're a different man. I think you're a different man than the one that was in the Weather Underground, and you've said so. Let me ask you, are you concerned that the centrist positions of the people Senator Obama, President-elect Obama has named, Senator Clinton, Jim Jones, General Jim Jones, Bob Gates, the holdover defense chief, are you concerned that she's putting establishment figures who supported the war authorization in Iraq in powerful positions of influence over him, that the people in the room all around him now will be people who disagreed with him and you about the Iraq war? Are you worried about that?
A bit, but I think that people like you and me, and probably most of the people who watch your show, are suffering a kind of postpartum depression. That is, we were so used to reading the polls and getting agitated about every nuance of what was happening that we now don't know what to do with ourselves, so we try to read the mind of the president-elect. I think it's much less important that we do that than that we pay attention to building on the ground forces that want to rethink and reimagine what America could be.
Well, Mr. Ayers, with all due respect, you agitate your way, I agitate my way. Thank you very much for coming on Hardball. The name of your book is Fugitive Days. Thanks for coming on, Bill Ayers.